finally made it to DC in 1993 after 18 years of purgatory in Ohio, I immediately started wearing Doc Martens, smoking American Spirit cigarettes, and reading The New Yorker. My freshman year was epic. We saw Kurt Cobain smash his guitar up on stage because he wasn't dead yet. We took the bus to New York on the weekends and hung out in Washington Square Park and smoked clove cigarettes. And I learned that, unbeknownst to me, I had been being oppressed by the patriarchy for 18 years and I was supposed to be mad about it, and I never even knew. In short, every day I woke up and thought, thank God I'm here. This is where I'm supposed to be. This is who I'm supposed to be. So you can imagine that when my mother told me at the end of my freshman year that there was no more money for school and I was gonna have to come back to Ohio, I was devastated, the way that only somebody who has glimpsed the promised land and been denied can be. And I spent that year in Ohio, which should have been my sophomore year in DC, working at Walmart, taking classes at the local community college, and trying to adjust to a life that no longer contained Thai food or lattes. My mother suggested that I think of my time in DC as a year abroad. And I thought, well, maybe that's it. Maybe that is who I'm supposed to be. Someone who went away for a while and came back, but is essentially, it's like I never left. But luckily that's not what happened, because through some fancy financial aid wrangling, which I hope the statute of limitations has run out on now, I made it back to DC for what would have been my junior year. And I came back triumphant, like someone who had fought a war in a far-off land and lived to tell the tale. But things had changed. A year is a long time in college. And my friends were different. I was academically a year behind because the community college classes weren't really cutting it. And most importantly, I was really poor, despite the financial aid, devastatingly, no money for the phone bill, no money for the bus, ramen noodles every night poor. And after 2 years of that, of working 2 minimum wage jobs and going to school full time and still falling behind, I dropped out. Right as all the people I'd started college with were graduating and moving to Brooklyn to work in the dot-com boom. And despite the fact that I was no longer in school, I had no intentions whatsoever of moving back to Ohio. In fact, for years, I never went home for more than 48 hours because I was afraid they would find a way to keep me there. But in order to stay in DC, I needed a way to support myself, a way to kind of, catch my breath, get my head above water, and get some space to figure out what came next. And I found all that when I got a job waiting tables at an Irish pub called Murphy's. Now, context. My father was a career bartender, and my stepfather was a career alcoholic, so between the two of them, I spent more time in bars before I was 15 than most people do before they're 40. And so Murphy's felt like home to me, and it was such a relief to be in a place where I was finally not struggling every minute. And the service industry lifestyle is very, very attractive to someone in their early 20s. I had money in my pocket every night, which was a huge relief. I had unlimited access to alcohol, which was awesome. I got to sleep in until noon. I got a lot of sexual intrigue with my coworkers without really putting out any effort. And all in all, it was just great. And so after a few months of that, I thought, well, maybe this is who I'm supposed to be. This isn't such a bad life. I could do this. And so it was one hot, sticky August night after I'd been to 1 or 2 or 8 bars, and the night supposedly was ending. This really cute Irish boy said to me, "Hey, you want to come with me to this after-hours club called Sugars?" And I said, well, first of all, I've always been kind of an accent whore. And secondly, as I said, I'd had 20 beers. So I said, absolutely, person I don't know very well, I will get in your car with you and go to a place I've never heard of because I just can't think of anything that could be wrong with that scenario. But I started to regret it pretty much right away because number one, he'd had 20 beers too, which I hadn't really thought of. And number two, he drove me way far away from the upper northwest neighborhood where we were living and into a very, very bad part of town. And my instincts were further alarmed when Sugars turned out to be not a club, not a bar, but a row house. And not just a row house, but when we stepped inside, a hot, smelly, crowded row house full of people doing massive amounts of drugs. Everybody was smoking weed. There were people cutting lines of cocaine on the table. Sugars, see what I did there? That's really what it was called. And snorting it, money changing hands. And as I my eyes adjusted to the gloom and I looked around a little bit more, I noticed that I was one of very, very few women there, and of the women who were there, I was the only one whose clothing adequately covered her vagina. At that tender point in my life, I had never actually seen pimps and prostitutes before, but it turns out that, like pornography, you know it when you see it. And so I turned to my adorable Irish friend and I was like, oh my God, you know what? Thank you so much for bringing me here, but I'm just exhausted. And I think after all, I'm just gonna catch a cab and head home and I'll see you around. And he cocked his head at me and he put his hand on my arm and he said, I don't think it's the kind of neighborhood where you really be want to walking around trying to find a cab by yourself at this hour. It's probably not safe, so why don't you sit tight and I'll take you home in the morning. And because it was a good accent, right? I practiced that. And because it was 1997 when no one had cell phones and I really had no choice, I did. I just sat there and waited. And from the minute I got to Sugar's, I was as sober as I have ever been in my entire life. It was like I'd never had a beer ever. Every fight or flight response I had was on 100% full alert, and I kept my eyes glued to the door because I just knew that some sort of like massacre was gonna break out, and I was gonna have to run for my life. And I had plenty of time to think. And I thought, oh, my mom is gonna be so confused when she finds out that I died in a crack house full of whores in a bad neighborhood in the middle of the night. Like, I'm not perfect, but I'm not a crackhead, you know? I'm not a whore. At the same time, I was trying really hard not to make eye contact with anyone else at Sugar's, because I was equally afraid that they were gonna try to make me buy drugs or co-opt me into a life of prostitution, and I really did not want any part of either one of those things. And I also had a lot of time to think about all the bad decisions in my life that had brought me to this point, trapped in this crack house. And I thought, oh, really, Cara, really? Is this who you're supposed to be? But we lived, as you know, because I'm here. And Cutie Malone took me home as the sun was already up and it was already a disgusting and hot day, and I had to be at work again in like 2 hours. And I made it through that day somehow, but for the first time all summer when my shift at Murphy's was over, I didn't go out drinking with my friends. And I'd like to say what I did was go home and like set some tangible goals for myself and a timeline for accomplishing them and like get myself back on track, but the truth is, you know, figuring out who you are is sort of an evolving process. It's not something that happens overnight. What I did learn that summer is, while you may not figure out who you are overnight, there are some nights where you figure out who you definitely are not. And almost dying in a crack/whorehouse in a bad neighborhood is what that taught me. Thank you.